Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the Cleveland Community Police Commission Police Policy Committee, and we are calling the meeting to order at 6:07 p.m. on July 13th. We have a quorum, so we will do a roll call. Shandra, Benito.
Present.
Teri, Wang.
Present.
And Piet and Lier is present. We expect the other members to show up, but we wanted to get this started. So we have the agenda. Are there any questions or suggestions or anything we'd like to change? I mean, it's pretty flexible. Oh, Alana is asking for the caller number.
I said it.
Okay.
Do I hear the doorbell?
I did not hear it.
Something
Something
Yeah, I
rang.
heard it ringing.
It was a computer.
It was an email alert that
So we are working to get Alana, Garrett-Ferguson, another member of the committee, the phone number to call in. So she should be calling in shortly.
I have a policy update that I think could be included in the work group report, but
Yeah,
we could also add
I
it.
figured that would be, yeah, we'll put it in there. That's great. Awesome. All right, so let's wait for Alana just for a moment if she's going to call in, since the two of you are on that work group, Teri.
Sounds good.
We should have some, entertaining music.
Elevator music.
Would you like to sing a song for us?
I'm the worst singer in my family.
Here we go.
Oh, I was like,
Alana?
Yes, this is me.
Hi.
Alana.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey.
So just to note that Alana Garrett-Ferguson is now in attendance. We just started and called roll, and we're getting ready to start. Have you seen the agenda?
Yes, I have the agenda pulled up.
As long as you can hear.
Alana,
Okay,
can we
yeah.
test you again?
Can you speak?
Yeah, I said I had the agenda pulled up.
Okay, great. So there's a quick update that Shandra wanted to add, and now we're going to start with the Emerging Police Surveillance Technology Work Group report, knowing that we've only started this work a couple weeks ago, but if you could tell us what's going on, what you're thinking, and I've got some information too that I'd love to share.
So Teri and I haven't met yet since Teri was out of town. I wanted to make sure both were here for it, so we plan on meeting tomorrow via Zoom to share, and we'll have another update. And we just got the report Jason sent over about the police surveillance for what they have just released so far. So we're still combing through those documents, and then we'll have an update after we meet tomorrow.
Teri, do you have any updates?
Yeah, so that's, we're gonna go through the previous surveillance reports, as she said, and what I would like to know is that what do you need for us? I understand we need to populate this committee. I think we have a few feelers out for people in the, and then Ms. Garrett-Ferguson and I can talk more about what we need, but could you give us an idea, because I see later on that we're going to need a budget, what would you like us to produce as a document for you so we can proceed?
Sure. Well, I'm going partly on the email from Jason Goodrick, who is looking for each work group to put together a brief synopsis of the work group and what it's doing, list of projects that you plan to work on, objectives of each project, key measurable results, and budget requests, to the extent that you have them. I think Jason, you had talked about July 28th. I think this is going to be pretty initial on some of the stuff. We'll just be getting started. So if you'd like to talk a little more about, and that goes for the other work group as well, but what you're looking for and the use of that would be helpful.
Question, so July 28th is a part of our work group, just for clarity?
I'm sorry?
July 28th is a part of our work group. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Deadline. She wants to
Well, Jason can talk about it. It's something that Jason sent out for all the work groups, and so he's going to talk about that for a minute now, what that means and what we're looking for there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's part of the presentation that I gave to each work group. Pete, you already covered the main points of it, but It doesn't, you don't have to overthink it because it's just a framework. But it gives us a compass to align all of the deadlines of all of the work groups and all the projects into a master doc so we can distribute resources and plan appropriately. And I know you have budget on the business part, so I'll talk about that later unless you want to skip ahead to that now. But the main thing is we have to know what you're trying to achieve in a work group. Otherwise, you can end up all over the place, right? So you want to have some measurable points. For instance, in the surveillance, if you look at the old report, there are a good starting point is the handful of recommendations that were already made. We know that one of them they have completed, which is developing a GPO for ShotSpotter technology, right? But the GPO has not been reviewed by us in this capacity, nor has it been shared with the public and receive feedback in that way. So one objective could be, for example, to review that GPO and make any suggested edits or negotiate changes with the Division of Police about that GPO. So that could be one objective. And then another objective could be to pick some of those original recommendations for follow-up in whatever way the work group sees fit. So there are other technologies. We know about the drones. We know they're using license plate readers. There is no GPO that was provided that dictates that. So it could be to work with the division to create a GPO for automated license plate readers. It could be to work with the division to create a master policy on surveillance technology, which was also a recommendation. They haven't even defined what that means internally and what would fall under that umbrella. So those are some examples of what a work group can do that for this work group would be low-hanging fruit because a lot of the pre-research has already been done.
So in terms of you said, I don't think there's no GPO for the drones either, right? License plate readers or drones, right?
And that is correct. And I have an inquiry in about, I'm not even certain that they've applied for an FAA exemption yet for public safety to fly drones here in Cleveland yet. They may or may not have one. So those are the kind of things we'll have to look at and see how far along are they in the drone program, and hopefully we can stay ahead of this stuff and have a conversation before they're actually flying over our heads.
So I did want to add the meeting I mentioned before and the other meeting to the Oakland Privacy Commission. That's like a branch. It's not their police commission, but it's additional kind of, I guess, work group for them. So they talked about all these technologies. They've had ShotSpotter for a long time, but there was some type of plane kind of drone technology. So we want to review it. It's a long meeting, but it's topical. And I think we're going to probably face some of the similar issues. So I can send out that link to that, and it will certainly onboard us with what a city that has had these technologies is contesting and tussling with. So that's okay. Just as a base, not to say that they are very proximate also to a technology center in Berkeley. So they might be able to give us some distinct information.
Great. Alana, do you have any additional thoughts? I've got some things I'd like to jump in with, but if you have thoughts.
No, I'm just listening. That sounds good with Commissioner Wang mentioned about sending out to everyone.
Okay.
I'm in agreement.
Great. So the things that because I started looking at some of this stuff a while ago before the committee was even formed. So and I've mentioned, I think, to some of you. So I had a conversation on Tuesday. I think I mentioned last time I was going to do this. The Innocence Project, which is a national group, they're looking at Ohio to do work here. So I talked to them on Tuesday, and we've agreed that they would be interested in learning more. And so they're also they have two sort of main focuses, and they're looking to work in a local community in Ohio. They haven't selected that community yet. But one of them is more litigation, which I don't think would be, at least from my understanding right now, would be at least this policy committee's purview, but they're also looking at policy. So we agreed that we would keep in touch and sort of set up, if there's maybe an initial meeting of a work group or something, we could invite them to that. And so they're very interested. They have a person based in Cincinnati who used to work for the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and another person who is not in Ohio but is their sort of lead policy person. So I think it's an interesting connection for us. Somebody, again, national expertise and looking to work in different communities. So,
That'd be great.
the other thing that we mentioned is Brian Ray, who both Jason and I have been in touch with, and he is going to be available the last week of July. So, and I feel like I don't want to like interfere with what y'all are doing, but I'm trying to set the time to talk to him, and maybe for that I would definitely invite one of you. I'd like to do it just because I started the connection, but if that's okay, because we can't really do all three of us, right? So I can send you that once that starts moving, if that's okay. And maybe Jason, if you would make sense for you to be part of that too, since you've had experience with him. And the third piece is the ACLU, and Gary Daniels from ACLU Ohio was on the work group before that did the surveillance tech. And I've been working with him for several years. And so I've talked to him about it a little bit, but haven't reached out to him lately. So I would certainly, we can loop him in when that makes sense. So those are my additions to that.
Could those people, Pete, is there any chance that they could come to that tomorrow's like the next surveillance work group meeting so that Commissioner Teri and I can meet them and start to also build a rapport relationship with those folks as well?
Totally, yeah. I think that would be a great, if not the immediate next step, but soon, yeah, we should once set that up.
Because I was just thinking, I know work groups in the past, like they can include people from the community and other like subject matter experts. And I don't know what their capacity is or how Teri feels, but like maybe if we like have some conversation with them too, and because they've already done so much work around this and have research, maybe this could also be a way of including them. I know there's probably other community members that's going to want to be a part of the work group, but I was just thinking like if this also could be a thing. I know for the work group that Commissioner Benito and I have we've talked about like adding people from the community and what that looks like and providing a framework. So I would think like with this one, maybe we could do something similar.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to echo that because it's, we're going to have plenty of experts and the expertise is definitely needed. I don't think we should remove this out, someone that has understanding of the experience of this technology, like at the ground level. I'm not sure exactly who that person would be, but that perspective would be interesting. And I really do believe that, once the expertise is given, I think anybody can make a common sense decision based on it. So I don't want to exclude people from the community. There are two lawyers who have expressed interest to be on this committee too that previously served, I believe, or at least one of them, Mr. Gordon Friedman and Mr. Lucat, who are both previous commissioners. So I think we have sufficient, Jason.
And to the chair, I'm fairly certain that if you recall any of the work group, they'll be happy to attend. Some places where there's a gap again is it's not so much the technology. So the one thing you'll run into is a lot of this is proprietary tech. So no one will know how it works. They sign NDAs so that if they were a tech at the company and they leave, they can't share proprietary secrets about how it works under the hood. So with a lot of these things, we don't know how that works, and it's not necessarily relevant. But what we do need to know for certain, where Commissioner Wang, I think you have a point. If we're looking for another expert to add, I would recommend someone who is very adept in big data. This is a big data issue, right? And it's really an issue of big data. How can it be used? What can be accessible in it? What could these things scoop up? How could that be? What kind of ways can it be used to surveil a person that would be of concern for us that we might not even be looking at, right? So if they were to pull a file from a drone that flew for an hour over the city, what would that look like? And how would you dissect that file? And then how would you separate that data in there? And how would you redact what's not relevant, to a call or a court case? So that's a big data question. And so anyone with expertise in that area, and that is an emerging field, would certainly be a great addition to this committee.
Jason, did you have somebody, did you not have that person? Okay.
No, we didn't have, I mean, Brian understands it, but he's,
Right.
he attacks it from the law perspective and best practices. I think we're looking for someone with a lot of technical expertise that would be able to tell you, about how this is captured, how it's stored, what's accessible, who could see it, how is it read, all of those questions are relevant. Because part of the policy question will be is, how long do you store this stuff? Who has access to it? So that kind of stuff is certainly someone with technical expertise and big data knowledge would be an awesome addition. So Commissioner Wang, in your network, if you have somebody that fits that mold, I think that would
You
be.
can try to seek out, I have ideas of people not necessarily based here, but we can definitely ask them to
Yeah.
find somebody, and we'll go through the universities. We could still have experts that just occasionally we consult for information too, right? But
Right,
I
they don't
think
have to be on the list.
on the work group. But I think it would be, necessary just to have someone that has a lot broad, like not just like expertise, I would say, in data, but a historical understanding of the social conditions of what the impact of this type of technology is on people. And to also be able to break it down for the police officers that have to adhere to this GPO. So
And to the chair, I'll make one more point about community involvement. So we did preliminary assessment through a remote survey and SurveyMonkey about the feelings for surveillance and police surveillance, but we've never done a symposium or brought in the community in a broader, listening session on this stuff. So it'd be another thing that I could recommend if you're looking to bring in the community. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the work group level, but you should maybe consider having community conversations and going out to some of these neighborhoods where this is being deployed and talk to the residents there, see how they feel about it, what are their limitations, do they understand the implications of this stuff in their neighborhood. So part education, part listening. And that's where you don't need a budget to run this work group. You do need a budget to do something like that. So when we get to budgeting, that's what, if you're thinking along those lines, that's where we would design a budget to run something like that. A 2-month community forum on this across the city with facilitators and that kind of stuff would require a budget and things of that nature. So if you think along those lines, we have done things like that in the past for big issues like this. And it is the way other cities like Oakland operate. They do a lot of listening and, in the communities you're going to get feedback and to guide the policy. So something also to consider.
can I get some clarification? How much of a time scale do we need for the budget? Probably at least till the end of the year first, or what do we need a time span?
So it depends what you're asking for. So if this project is only going to go for the remainder of this year, we do have money for some community events, right, that we haven't tapped into. And that would typically cover things like providing food at one of these things or renting the facility, right? If we wanted to hire facilitators, that would take a little bit more time, effort. But at a project like this, I would conceive we would finish it before the last quarter of this year because we're already so far ahead in this. So everything would be encompassed in this budget. So depending on how the scope of it, but I don't think we have any restrictions with what the money is in the coffers this year to do this. And it also depends on how many other work groups want to do something similar. So that's why it's important that every work group puts their plan in place, because if 3 or 4 work groups want to do large scale community feedback sessions, then we have to find a way to merge them or prioritize them with what we have, or time them out so that some of them might have to get pushed back to next year when we have a new budget. So.
Okay, that's helpful, yeah. All right. And
I have a question, America. If
Go
we
ahead.
did something like a listening tour for surveillance, could we also collaborate with the outreach committee so that we're not taking all the money and everything from one bucket?
To the chair, yes, we can collaborate with whoever we wanted, and outreach would be great for for doing that. In fact, a way you could collaborate is if outreach were to develop this survey, right? It could also encompass some of the questions that we're looking for and feedback about issues like this. And then that survey could be also deployed at some of these symposiums. So there's a lot of ways to be creative and pair up with other work groups. But yes, outreach can use their network and their plans to help facilitate something like this as well.
Great. Okay. Any other thoughts on this work group and the police tech issue? I mean, Jason, you had suggested at one point of talking a bit about the previous work. I don't know if that's something we want to do, like what's already been done, so the community can. Have you all read previous reports on any of the CPC stuff?
Yeah. Right, not this. Yeah, we can.
I mean, they're on the website.
To the chair, if you want me to, I can quickly cover it. So there's an executive summary, and it does have just 5 bullet points that we recommended should be taken by the city. If you want, I can cover those. Okay. So this was from spring of 2022. We sent this report, and we looked at all the best practices. And to your point, Commissioner Wang, City of Oakland is the model. I mean, they are way ahead of the nation in as far as civil liberties and privacy protection, with cities working with government to implement technology that could be used for surveillance in a manner consistent with community feedback and having a commission. And what the police have to do there is, if they want to use a new technology, they have to do an assessment, right? So they have to internally generate a report and deliver it to the Privacy Commission, requesting this technology be reviewed by the Privacy Commission. But they're supposed to do their own homework on, what can this do? How is data stored? All those things. And then they bring it to the commission, and the commission adds to it. And then the commission will work to mediate between the police and the community what they're willing to accept, right? And if they will go forward with this. So that's how you sum it up. So what we did was, what Oakland did is first they defined surveillance technology. And as far as to my knowledge, Cleveland hasn't done that yet. So our first recommendation was CDP should adopt a definition of surveillance technology similar to the city of Oakland, California. And what we said that is any software, electronic device, system utilizing an electronic device or similar used, designed or primarily intended to collect, retain, analyze, process, or share audio, electronic, visual, location, thermal, olfactory, biometric, or similar information specifically associated with or capable of being associated with an individual or group, right? So it's a very broad definition, but the reason for that is because there's all kinds of stuff. We're only talking about what we know. We don't know what is coming down the pipe or what they have access to. We've heard rumblings that they are using variations of technology that can also store human DNA and analyze DNA in the field now. So other cities are already looking ahead at this kind of stuff because it's really broad. So all of that is encompassed in that. The next recommendation would be CDP should fully disclose to the public its use of any technology that meets the definition. So again, we don't know what they're using. They may not disclose what they're using. There are ways, I'm not saying CDP does this, but other cities have sidestepped even their own city council and deployed technology that was leased to them, loaned to them, given to them by private foundations that they're using unchecked. So I'm not saying this is what CDP has done or do we have any evidence that they're doing this, but it has happened in the past and we don't know what they're using. We don't have a full map of that. So CDP should complete a surveillance impact report for all technology utilizes that meet the above definition and provide a copy to the Community Police Commission for public dissemination and discussion, right? So once we know what they have, we would like to see what their impression of the, what their assessment of the impact of using that is on the community. And then CDP should immediately develop consent decree compliant general police orders guiding the use of surveillance technology that it utilizes, including but not limited to ShotSpotter, automated license plate readers, drones, and smart cameras. The policies should be inclusive of community feedback and community values. So as we mentioned before, they did comply with one of those items. There is now a policy on ShotSpotter. However, it was dated early this year, right around the time we requested it. So it was something that was generated after this report was completed. And they were using ShotSpotter already without a policy before that. CDP should revise, and the final one is CDP should revise existing search and seizure policy to be more restrictive in regards to technology and privacy, including mandating a warrant when an officer wishes to search personal electronic devices, except in exigent circumstances. This is particularly important in relation to interactions with youth. Again, youth are the biggest users of technology, and there's a lot of crossover for how police can use technology and surveillance technology to be invasive into your personal technology. So it's a complex issue. Those are our major recommendations. So there's a lot to dive deeper into for this committee, and it gives them a really in-depth head start. We have quite a bit of hours of work into this already prior to the seating of this commission and the reforming of the work group.
So I want to go back. Thank you so much, Mr. Grubrick. I want to go back. If it seems like certain technology, we have at least kind of a heuristic understanding what it's doing, right? It's simple enough that we know basically how. But something like ShotSpotter, I did read like a ACLU report about ShotSpotter, and given that it's proprietary technology. Do we need to think about how are we going to measure, right, independently, how effective, or is there anything potentially nefarious about impact, right? How are we going to set up kind of studies within independently, right? Because this is the only problem. If it's proprietary technology and we're relying on the companies own, of course they want to sell this technology and have it adopted, and these are, I'm imagining, very lucrative contracts. How can we independently assess that we should have enough? Is there a way to set up something environmentally in the communities to assess these things? And it's just measuring probably accuracy, measuring disparate impact, measuring where and when it should be deployed, if it's going to be deployed. My understanding from the ACLU report, one concern is that it's disproportionately going to draw, right? Say there are neighborhoods that are whatever they call high, what is the term? High crime? Is it high crime? So I guess theoretically you will have more shots there potentially, but is the increased police presence that's drawn to those shots, what other impact would that have on the community, right? It doesn't mean that another community with no shots, nothing nefarious is happening there that would require the police. And it may go into how to divide police resources. They keep saying to us that there's a lack of, they don't have sufficient manpower. So I think that might be a kind of a periphery issue. I don't know who would be dealing with that. With how are we dealing with how the police are deployed and the assignments of?
Well, it's the general policy of so how things are deployed, how technology is deployed. I would say that would be definitely part of it.
Of the people, of the patrol people,
I don't know. I mean.
So, okay.
Well, I mean.
Right.
You're shaking your head. You can tell us later. I mean, at the policy level, I guess that's not about the actual deployment, but I don't know. You can look into it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. Jason, do you have?
To the chair, our 115.5 covers almost every aspect of policing in some way, but it doesn't mean you're the final authority on that specific thing, right? So the charter does give the chief of police deployment as a specific power. And so that discussion is relevant in a lot of ways. Certainly when it comes to resource management and efficiency, I would say the commission should certainly be involved in that conversation on some levels because it crosses over a lot of the work, so it's an open-ended question. Right. I think it's a relevant conversation to this day and age because of what's happening in Cleveland right now. A lot of the conversation is about resource management. It is part of the consent decree. They did have to do a work deployment plan for the forces. And the first commission, that came across the desk. We didn't have a lot of resources to devote to the workforce plan when it was presented to the court, and it hasn't been updated in years. But I know that conversation was just announced yesterday via press conference that they are talking about, because recruitment is certainly in your purview. In fact, you're a final authority on recruitment and examinations, and they are just starting a summit with the union on that issue, which includes efficiency and deployment of the resources. So certainly now to the point of Commissioner Wang, when they expanded ShotSpotter, they did contract with Cleveland State University. I'm not sure which school, it could be Levin, to have an outside independent study on the efficacy of ShotSpotter in Cleveland. So the details of that are unknown to us. We can also, peer into that and see, what metrics they are looking at, and then determine if this work group thought there were some additional metrics, how we could possibly look at those as well, right? But there is a third party outside independent entity that was contracted by council at the recommendation of a lot of activists who said you need to really look at, not just take ShotSpotter's word for how the efficacy, you got to evaluate it yourselves.
Yeah, just one sec. So in terms of the deployment issue, for me, it's more like we are talking about policy, which impacts and guides deployment. It's not like we're going to be saying, send this, whatever. We're not in the weeds like that, but I think the policies guide that kind of work. So go ahead.
So I think to make more clear what I mean, if I can give a scenario that I can think could happen, we have a tendency, I think, with technology to think that it has some higher level of accuracy, like we maybe overestimate it. So I hate to be in a situation that you have a ShotSpotter going off, but then you have in another neighborhood, or at least similar, that there's one unit that's able to respond, and they have to choose between the ShotSpotter and someone, I don't know, being stabbed or something like that. How does the officer, and I don't know if we need to talk about this in training or the GPO, how do they decide in that exigent circumstance which is more, and how is it coded? So I think that there is a bias towards kind of over-reliance on technology, where there could be many other ways that people can be harmed physically in the city. So I think we saw one that that depending on how the dispatcher codes it, it could really determine the response. Yes.
I think we don't need to get into all the details right now, but I think you got a lot to think about as you establish the work group. So
can I clarify, do we have any purview over the dispatch system?
To the chair, there is no mention of dispatch in 115. So that is a perspective that, again, is untested. Dispatch does fall under Cleveland Division of Police. So I'm sure there are ways that they will cross over. But even the previous commission, we didn't look specifically at the GPOs or policy that is for the dispatch center in any way, shape, or form. It was related to patrol officers and divisional GPOs.
Silence in the law can work different ways.
Yeah, that is correct. So I would imagine if there is something but the question is how much power to, it's very specific that in some police GPOs you're the final authority. Is that encompassing of dispatch GPOs untested, unknown, undefined in 115.5?
So I think we should move on probably. One thing I just remembered, and I looked it up while I was sitting here, is like ShotSpotter is now part of a company called Sound Thinking. They changed their name. So that's interesting.
Well,
Sound Thinking.
I had to, this is kind of a little, using my own academic log to kind of get through stuff. But so I just had to go get off my own thing, the article about ShotSpotters ineffectiveness, basically. And I think that might, I'll send it to the commissioners.
Sure, great.
And that was a fairly recent, that was 2021, I believe, that study came out. And that is a very, it just makes it show that there was no real impact with the shot spot or homicide rates
Right.
within, within different communities. And I think the word is starting to get out that it's not a particularly efficient system. It is a very sort of exciting and new thing, and so people are kind of intensely interested in it, but its overall efficacy, and the fact that it's just the idea that the government has a bunch of microphones planted around that the police can listen to is something that many citizens found somewhat disconcerting. So.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let's move on to the next work group report. Behavioral health and crisis intervention. Shandra.
Yes, so we are definitely still in the planning stages, but I'd love to kind of share some of the conversations that have been happening so far. Myself and Commissioner Earley have not had a chance to meet yet, but we are working on getting that scheduled. But I have talked to some folks in the community about interest in serving on the work group. Rosie Palfi, as you might remember, who was a long time MRAC member and community advocate, is interested. Elaine Schleifer, who is the director of REACH, which stands for
Responding to Empathy, Access, and Community Healing.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Van Lier, and who is also an MRAC member. Angela Cicis, who is that my saying her name right?
Cicis, yeah.
Cicis, yeah. Who is has a history as she was a co-responder within the Cleveland Division of Police and is now working within the Cleveland Department of Public Health to look specifically at care response and care models and crisis response and potential kind of more what's the word when it's wholesome, more holistic. Thank you so much. More holistic care response models, and she said that she would be interested. And then I also did have a conversation with Reverend Goldstein, who also expressed potential interest. So some of the other folks that we were thinking about include, and that's one question I kind of wanted to bring to the committee is, in terms of representation from the Cleveland Division of Police, if we should consider Lieutenant Mullins and Sergeant Crespo, who are both over CIT and co-response, and then some other folks that we're kind of still in the process of thinking about. One thing that I did want to ask is generally how large have our work groups been, just as an idea as we start kind of working on recruiting folks.
And to the chair, the work groups have filled the entire table at times. It just depends on the importance of the topic, how relevant it is, and how many people want to volunteer time. I think CIT is one specific area where, if you look at the size of MRAC meetings, you can definitely you'll definitely have to trim it down a bit because you'll have a tremendous amount of interest. Even Commissioner Van Lier and his other life over at Policy Matters, when you were doing the care response calls, I mean, you had 4 pages of Zoom heads on there, and so there's a lot of people interested in seeing improvement in this area. So you will, the recommendation I have is they don't have to be, you identify your core work group, and then like Commissioner Wang said, sometimes if you need a specific expertise, you just call them in for one meeting and say, we want to hear from you specifically or your organization today as a presentation to the work group, right? Doesn't mean they have to be permanent membership on the work group.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
So I would like to inquire, maybe suggest someone with true understanding of limited English abilities, and maybe someone from a paramedic background, that has to respond, like the other people involved in this care response. It would be like an active practitioner maybe. Because I don't know if Lieutenant Mullins are they actively on patrol?
To the chair, I think the paramedic's a great idea. I also would say, we have Sergeant Richard Jackson sitting here, and the value of Sergeant Richard Jackson is he was a street practitioner, not a white shirt who, is saying what you should do. And yes, I'm calling you out, but his street experience was extremely valuable. So if you're looking for, insight into real officer experience with a trained, certified CIT practitioner on the street that is out there doing these calls, I would ask Lieutenant Mullins if he could send, one of his best, most experienced officers who are working the street to be on this work group, as opposed to the person in charge of the program, because they do have different perspectives.
Yeah, there's the co-response teams, there's a couple people there who are really good. I would also, paramedic, I know somebody who can do that, but I feel like this list is all people I know. So hopefully you'll find some people, like, not that it matters, it's not about me, but I feel like there's gotta be some people in the community that you and Kyle can find who are paying attention to this and who aren't the usual suspects kind of thing. So,
I have one other suggestion. Didn't was it Shaker Heights or Cleveland Heights?
Shaker.
That it was a co-responder model, right?
It is still, yeah.
So maybe the people that worked on that campaign might have some, what is it?
And Ed Amistadi is the co-responder there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from maybe also like that they've actively campaigned, not because of a political, that they would have the political understanding of how maybe the community feels about this a little bit more.
And to the chair, one more point, I would say if you can find somebody who is a frequent user of Cleveland Division of Police to help with a family member or themselves in crisis, who has actual experiential, real world, I am dependent on the system to help crisis in my household. I have been for a period of time. If you can find some experiential people who are really who are dependent on the system working effectively to take care of their loved ones or themselves, I would say that would be another value add to your group.
Yeah, and Teri, will you, real quick, sorry.
May I?
Yes, you may. Just real quick, there is that coalition in Shaker. Is that what there's a coalition trying to get a ballot issue passed? So maybe
Didn't they pass it? With
No,
Keith,
no, in Shaker.
Keith
Oh, and Shaker.
and
It has not.
no.
Yeah, Keith. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
But I do have
Let's let Sean.
I appreciate the enthusiasm because I think it demonstrates that we care about this. I wasn't quite done listing other people that.
It's gonna be a block party.
You just jumped right in.
Yes, but I was also not so much going to name individuals, but groups of like people that we want represented, and that includes people with lived experience, as I think both of you indicated. Also, we wanted, including in addition to lived experience, someone who is a family member. Some of the groups that I wanted to reach out to were parent advocacy groups that are related to people with developmental disabilities and also people on the autism spectrum, because those tend to be in groups that end up being high users, and also some folks in the juvenile diversion space, just because a lot of times when looking at youth that are being called in for crisis calls, when sometimes that kind of juvenile diversion and youth crisis calls and adult crisis calls get kind of separated and don't always talk to one another. But oftentimes there's a lot of related cases within families, and so including some of those folks, and also some practitioners on the ground. And so definitely all of those will be considered. If you have, particular people that you would like, that you would like to see involved, please feel free to send me their name. I certainly would love to have Sergeant Jackson I believe you've been voluntold, so I'll follow up with you. And yes, so thank you guys for your enthusiasm on this. I think one of the challenges that I think Piet said eloquently is there are a lot of different standing meetings, from looking at MRAC to some of the behavioral health meetings across the county for the Adams Board, where you have a lot of these kind of usual suspects in attendance. And a lot of times if you go to those meetings, it's a lot of Zoom heads and, people understandably multitasking while the meeting is happening because they're overworked and there's, not enough resources. And so, I think that part of what will happen is, I think who is engaged in the work group might change depending on the project that is the focus. So then the potential projects, and I think that as we get these work groups started, I think that identifying some of the potential projects will change as we are able to have conversations with people, with work group members that will, have boots on the ground and can say, hey, these are the areas that we think. But some projects that I have, or that we've developed as potential projects through, I had some good conversation with some of the folks that I identified earlier, and then also with Jason, with Executive Director Goodrich. Include one is a general evaluation of how crisis intervention is going. In the Cleveland Division of Police, to our knowledge, there's not been a kind of more in-depth evaluation of how is the crisis intervention program going, and that and we think about how crisis intervention is happening at the CDP. That includes both, crisis calls that are happening that are not being responded to by CIT, crisis intervention team, and then also the co-responder team. Some of the ways that I think that we can do this evaluation include getting a data file of the crisis forums. So as you may remember from some of our training, that every time that there is a mental health crisis or some sort of crisis happening, even if it's not identified at the beginning, they do fill out a crisis form. And so I think that we could get a list of those crisis forms from the last couple of years, the last 2 years, and then do a randomized review of a certain number of those cases, and just review the cases, see what we're seeing, kind of reported, what language is being used in the write-up, what are some of the trends, and then actually following up with the folks involved in those cases. So whether that is the person that was experiencing the crisis, other people who are on the scene who are named, any professionals that we know that are involved, and just asking some questions about how did we feel like, how did you feel you were treated in the situation? How did you feel like, did you feel like if things escalated or de-escalated? Were you given any information about resources, before and after this situation happened? Did you feel like you were better or worse off than when the law enforcement arrived? And just then additionally, doing some potential surveys or interviews. We don't want to over survey, and there's a lot of talk about a number of different surveys going around, so we don't want to over survey the community, but it could look like having some, having some focus groups with, identifying some organizations like the centers and Frontline and some of the other, organizations that are on the front lines of a behavioral health crisis in Cleveland, and asking them if they could identify two practitioners who are interacting a lot with CDP in their work, and then having a focus group with them and just kind of getting a sense of, what are you seeing? Is this working? What would you like to see improved? And then also doing a survey of officers, which could include general officers, because like I said, general patrol officers, CIT, and co-responder officers are not the only ones that are responding to crisis calls, and then also CIT and co-responders. So that is the first potential project. The second one is a review of OPS complaints that have been related to crisis intervention and behavioral health calls from the past 2 years. And the reason why we would do this overview is not necessarily to look at the discipline outcomes, although, if we find some trend, we could certainly send that on to the Police Discipline and Accountability Committee. But to just look at, are there any trends that we're seeing and issues that might be coming up in their calls? Also, what people are saying about their experiences, and that can help point us to some different policy issues that we might have. And then the third potential project is a review of the officer wellness programs and the mental health support that officers are receiving. And that could look like reviewing best practices, doing a survey of our officers, doing some focus groups, and then also looking at what models are being used in other parts of the country and other research. So that is the kind of potential projects that have been identified, although I do recognize that once we get people together, other things will probably be identified, but would love to get your thoughts.
Great, thank you. Just for a point of clarity, the second one was review of OPS. Could you repeat just the title of it?
Yeah, so a review of OPS complaints related to crisis intervention / behavioral health calls.
Okay. So yeah, thank you. That's very thorough. It's a lot. So it's good, and seems good to me. I don't have any questions right now. I feel like as you develop it, if other people can be a resource or connector, please let us know.
Well, I just did have one thought that might be missing from the list. I do think
Of people or
Of people.
ideas? Okay.
Since we have lawyers on every single kind of work group, it seems like, but I think a civil rights attorney for this type of law might be helpful, that has experience with that protected class.
That's a great idea, because one of the issues that does come up is about involuntary, my brain, it's been a long week, involuntary commitment, and there are definitely some, I bet we could find some people involved in that.
And I mean, this also, are there policies that, what are the GPO, the policies that border on the civil rights law in GPOs, that whether for mental health or for something, probably it would be search and seizure, something.
Some of the GPOs that I think are
Excessive force.
connected to it is one looking at the policies and procedures around how law enforcement is working with mental health professionals when they're making the determination about whether to bring someone to the hospital. The other one is something that, with the new concealed carry and new firearm laws, is that one of the things is that one of the changes that happened is that, and there's some exceptions in other states, where if you have someone who's called in and says, I'm thinking about killing myself, and maybe they call it a crisis line. The crisis line, if they believe that someone is in danger, then they are mandated by law to call law enforcement to check on them, conduct these wellness checks. And one of the things now is that officers cannot search people's homes for firearms or without a warrant, based on some of the new firearms laws. And so that is something, there's just some policies like that are all connected. So there was another, connected, but a little bit separate. I did want to share an update about a new policy, new divisional notice that went out this week. And I got this information from Rosie Palfy, and it was discussed in the CIT, the MRAC training committee today. And that is, so in the past, there's been a change in police incident codes. And so police incident codes are used both by dispatch, identified by dispatch when sending officers out, and then also in how police incidents are coded in the paperwork and the write-ups. And so effective July 1st, the codes and descriptions used to describe an individual in crisis have changed. I'm reading from the divisional notice. It says that the codes and descriptions, so how it was written before was that it was coded as mental nonviolent or mental violent to describe someone who is in crisis and to describe whether it was a potential violent situation or a nonviolent situation. But those codes have now changed to crisis intervention nonviolent and crisis intervention violent, or CITN or CITV. And it says here that the word mental shall not be used to describe an individual and or their behavior. The new codes and descriptions shall be utilized by communication control section to code assignments. Speaking of Rosie Palfy, oh, that's beautiful.
Sierra has too many A's, I had to turn
Yeah, the
the V
staff
into an A.
So, and supervisors are reading this directorate roll call for the next 7 days. And so this is really exciting. Rosie did share that actually this came out of OPS complaints that some folks who were receiving their incident reports saw in the language that the incident was being described as mental violent or mental nonviolent, as I think we can all understand how that is really stigmatizing and problematic language. And so I believe that they called Rosie to get her perspective and to consult with her, and this policy change has now been created. And so I think this is a really positive move. And also I think is part of why I want our work group to do a review of all of the OPS complaints that have some sort of connection to behavioral health or crisis intervention, because I do think that there are real policy changes that can be identified from seeing those complaints. And then of course, if we feel like there's something that is connected that we need to be reviewed connected to discipline, then we can certainly forward that on to the officer accountability and the police accountability and discipline committee. But I just also wanted to shout out Rosie for your great work on this, and I think it's very exciting.
Great. Well, thank you, Shandra. Is
Yeah.
there something specific or otherwise?
Very, very quickly, so, and we obviously can give information to this committee from the discipline too. I just had a thought and just want to keep our eyes on the ball. Her work group, and the one that we, Alana and I are in, I just want people to understand maybe the differences, that this is extraordinarily people-based. Ours is very, technical in some ways that we're relying. So I hope that we think about how we affect the outcomes in policy. Again, it's that we're not writing a policy and for someone to follow, but how do we affect the behavior of the people in the system, and the power dynamics, how do we make them more equitable, such that these policies can be fulfilled, so we don't have all these things to deal with in discipline too. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on. So the next item on the agenda is discussion of committee strategic priorities outside of those two work groups. And I have a list here based on previous conversation from our last meeting: discipline, bias-free policing policies, practices and training, civilian oversight structure, use of force, and data collection. And I feel like there's one that I was going to add, and I did, and it's not on this copy that I have because I updated it after I saved this copy. But Jason had suggested it in addition to that. So apologies for that. Can you provide that
To the chair, it is recruitment and examination. Since they are having a summit on that here, it's timeliness to find out how we can become involved in that at its inception instead of when it comes down the pipe as a final plan of action. So that is an important one to make sure that we stay in communication with the mayor's team, the safety director, and the police chief to see what they're thinking before they put something in down as a practice that we have not been a part of.
Go ahead.
Pete, could you, especially because there's the word discipline on there, could we be more, I mean, I'm assuming we're diving into this discussion, could we specify a little bit more? Because these are, just attaching the word policy to it, I don't know if that
Yeah,
makes it
that makes
clear,
sense, sure.
disambiguate everything.
I mean, that's on there. I think that's something we need to be paying attention to because there was a recommendation, a report from CPC, was it 2 years ago?
2019.
2019, 4 years ago. And it sounds like Director Goodrick, if you want to talk more about it, there is
So
a policy in
the
works
work group chair for that happens to be in the audience again here today. It was, so we put together a great work group filled with HR professionals, labor law attorneys, union representatives, police association representatives to look at the disciplinary, there's 2 points to this. There's the disciplinary policy and then there's the disciplinary matrix, right? 2 separate and independent pieces, but they're conjoined in ways. So the policy says how you're gonna do it. The matrix says when you identify a violation, it outlines the grouping for that violation and what the outcomes can be. We took a dive into both. We sent that over to the division and we don't have a formal response to it. However, I do know that there is a draft of updating both the divisional policy on discipline and the matrix floating around somewhere in the universe, being reviewed by both the DOJ and the monitoring team to become the next iteration of this. And from our understanding, they have adopted many of the recommendations of the CPC's work group. So that may be something, again, that we want to catch before it becomes a final piece, so that we can just see what they have done or what they're planning to send to the court before they send it to the court.
Yeah, I think that would. Alana, are you still with us?
Does it show an active line?
It's still counting. It's at 59 minutes.
She may be muted or on her end or
Well, let us know if you're still there, Alana.
occupied.
I can text her.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's been definitely something I would like to. I'd be happy to work with you all on that. And
again, it should be a low hanging fruit again because a lot of work has already been done on it. It should be relatively finalized, so it would just be a matter of, taking a quick look at it, seeing if there's any serious points of contention we have before it does go to the court for final approval.
Do we need to put in a sort of official request for that?
If you ask me to do so, I will follow up tomorrow with an email to see what the status is on those
I
policies.
think we should do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will have it in my notes here to check on the status.
Okay. A lot of this stuff is also from the compliance document, places that CPC is out of compliance with from the monitor's 12th semi-annual report, particularly bias-free policing policies, practice training, civilian oversight structure, use of force, and data collection. So that's just something we need to look at.
Yeah, and I can just go down the list and not tell you what I know to help you guys get oriented on this stuff here. Bias-free policing, we are in the data collection portion of that. The policy hasn't been reviewed by the CPC in probably since 2018. I don't think it's touched our desks since 2018 when it was adopted by the court. What the court and the world has been waiting for is now this is one of the compliance standards. To leave the decree, you must prove through data, right, that your bias-free policing policy is working as designed and be able to capture good data on this, which is reviewable. We still haven't seen their data points. So that is one of the areas that we should, and that is on this list as well, data collection, right? We can ask, and you did meet Dr. Isa, who is kind of the point person for setting up these data points of control. Yeah, she came to our one of our police trainings. And so it would be worth maybe inviting her here to specifically ask her questions on data points for this and see where they're at. You can also, in your spare time, which you will have very little of, review the bias-free policy itself. If you so choose to go down that road this year, you may want to put that at some point in your 18-month plan, but it looks like you have a lot of front-loaded work already. But to consider it in that 18-month plan might be worthwhile because it hasn't been reevaluated by the public or by us in a while. If you, in my mind, if you did a lot of changes to it, it would mean that the way they're collecting data may have to change as well. So it may be one that's a little difficult to affect major changes to at this point in the game, but still worth some feedback and eyes and understanding of what's in it and how it's supposed to work. So at the very minimum, the policy group may want to call back Dr. Isa and just have her and her team go over with you, how they're planning to evaluate that policy internally.
Alana can hear us, but she can't respond.
That's weird.
Is that mute? There is a mute button on the device itself.
No, that's a hand. Is it? Or is that mute? It's mute?
That's
Yeah.
the microphone.
Okay. Now it's muted.
Oh. Okay.
Alana, do you want to just try to call back in?
So while we're working on that, I'll continue down. Civilian oversight structure. This was one that didn't require a work group. In 2019, I want to say, Ryan, we pre issue 24, we did and this was staff. Staff did an evaluation of. We designed a system based on some research, academic research on what makes a good civilian oversight system. We gave it a point structure, and we did an evaluation of Cleveland's oversight system in 2019 and where we were at. And that paved the way, that work paved the way for issue 24 from a data and statistical standpoint, a best practices standpoint. It was used in the literature associated with that. So it was really a great way to start the oversight conversation. I have asked Ryan proactively to do an update using our same system post 115.5 to just do an assessment, and it will cover our base on getting compliant with this consent decree section. There isn't really anything that the CPC needs to do other than when it's complete, Ryan will present it to this board, to this committee specifically, and you guys can provide feedback on it at that point. But it's really a turnkey report that doesn't require a work group and it doesn't require time because you already have a lot vested, but it will get us compliant when it's finished in that one paragraph. Moving down the line, use of force is another one that's very comprehensive and complex. So where you choose to start on this will take a little bit more detailed insight and conversation and a more common operating picture. Where are we at? I would suggest you can read the monitor's reports, the 12th semi-annual, right? Because there's ways you can attack this. There's the policies themselves, which you were given in training. You saw that there are multiple use of force policies, right? There's also data collection element to this as well, right? There's also investigatory element to it. So what they call the blue team, where they're reviewing these things, right? And looking at use of force, how do they internally evaluate their own use of force? So it doesn't mean when it says in your consent decree paragraph that you have to look at everything. It just means that if you do this topic and you pick even a specific area of this topic and work on that at this point, I believe that would get you to operational compliance in that paragraph that covers use of force. If you were just to work on even one specific, very niche part of this whole entire use of force picture. So again, that one you could probably push back later in the 18-month schedule until you have a better understanding of what actually you want to look at in that. And then also, as some of these work groups that you're starting now clear their initial priorities, you can then shift to that one as well. And then the data collection portion of it, I think you're going to cover that in multiple points. You're looking at it from the technology standpoint. You're looking at it from the CIT standpoint. So that one's more of a broad thing, to evaluate. And so almost every one of these policies that you're going to be working on in this committee has some type of data collection element to it. So as long as you include that in your conversation, you cover that base fairly well.
Shandra.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thank you so much, Director Goodrick. I think that it would be great for us to, in the use of force, to do a review of how, like, what the review structure is, and also, they also do some periodic body cam footage. Oh, that's Alana calling back in. Hey, Alana. Okay, great, we can hear you again.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, my connection is just lost, and I was talking, but I realized you guys couldn't hear me, but I could hear you.
Oh,
All right.
okay, well, welcome back.
Shandra is speaking, so if you want to chime in after that, we'll let you know.
Yeah, I was gonna, I think that would be great, because there also is they do like some, random review of different body cam footage, is that correct? Also, like, just throughout.
So it's my understanding, and I don't have the policy in front of me. So every officer has to report a use of force. They also have a duty to, other officers have a duty to report a use of force that's seen, and then the supervisor has a duty to report the use of force, right? So it goes into a monitoring system, and then the use of force, there is an audit system to that, right? So then it goes to, they have a monthly meeting or the use of force review. I don't know if it's monthly. I think that was point of contention with the monitoring team, is they're not meeting as often as they should, where they look at each use of force in a period of time, and then they assess it against the policy. But the monitoring team did have some critiques about they could go deeper, right? So that there is a standard of necessary, right? So it may clear policy, but they're asking them to do a little bit deeper dive into, was it necessary, and were there tactical things or other things that led to this use of force that could have been prevented, right? So they are saying the depth of those could go a little bit deeper, and they, instead of just quickly coming to the assessment that this use of force was within policy at the minimal level, right? So there are some areas you can dive into there. This is one point where redundancy, I would suggest that through, in some way, shape, or form, you get some input from the monitoring team on where you can contribute to this, because they're already putting a tremendous amount of resources into this, and we don't need to put redundant resources into tackling the same problem, right? And this is another one where the community has a particularly large interest, right? So to something that you found that's a niche, for instance, right? You could look at use of force to a specific group. I know Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson was concerned about use of force on what we would consider juvenile in the policies, right? So those types of areas where maybe the monitoring team's not looking as hard anymore, you can double back on something like that, right? So find something that that isn't a redundant thing where the monitoring team has already put a huge amount of money, time, effort into looking at, and you're not going to uncover anything new, right, or contribute something that hasn't already been said.
I think the other thing that I can actually add to our work group is reviewing use of force cases where a crisis form was also filled out, and reviewing those, because then we can contribute to meeting of that that box as well. So, but yeah, thank you. I think that would be a great area for us to look at, especially looking at that process, because I do think that there's going to be a certain amount of this as we get this committee started of even understanding how do we identify what policies are lacking, or what trends are we seeing that we need to address. And so, yeah.
Great. All right, that's super helpful. Thank you, Director Goodman. So I think, I guess looking at what we get from the work groups over the next period of time, maybe it's on me, somebody as a chair, working with you to sort of work on that 18-month timeline, and be happy to take that on.
Yeah, and one of the things that the chair of this committee can do is work, build a close relationship with the compliance unit. The compliance unit at CPD is the unit that revises these policies, and they're on a schedule. I think I forwarded that schedule to this group, right? So you may also want to build a relationship with whoever is, I'm not certain who's running the compliance unit right now, but I would say, working with the chair, we can establish at least maybe a monthly call with them to see what's going on, check in with the compliance unit, see what policies they're currently working on, and see where we can fit into that process as well. Because while you're working on your plan, they're moving forward with their world and they're doing stuff, right? And so it's going to quickly become an overwhelming amount of work for this policy group. I think you guys have the brunt of the load. So I can't remember who made the point before, I think it was Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson. If the load gets too heavy, feel free to cross, to work with other committees to share that load. There's only 13 of you, so even if you do that, you're going to eventually hit a wall of time and energy. So that's why getting this to us as quickly as possible as staff, so we can then prioritize this as the entire commission is very important.
Alana, do you have, I know that you've missed a big chunk or a small chunk and we're not able to talk for part of it. So if you have something you want to add right now, if you can still speak. Uh-oh. Alana, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
Yes, I was just listening. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Teri?
Thank you so much. So the more I'm listening to this, and perhaps we need to have a deeper discussion of this, I'm seeing so much overlap. Like, I'm concerned about the workflow, that if you're looking at cases and then you are also on accountability, that we're looking at cases, is there a way that we need to better integrate the two committees' overlap? Especially because I, again, want to emphasize that, or maybe you can explain to me, because my understanding is that accountability goes beyond just purely meting out or measuring discipline. It's ensuring, I think, understanding from the people's side, so we can bring it to you, additional information, that policies can be written in a way that the policies can, it's by themselves, hold the people accountable, and that they are, so if Mr. Goodrick or anybody else could explain just the overlap a little bit, because it's not that I don't want you to look at the cases, it's just that there's going to be a lot of overlap, and we're very, I think we're now starting to see how much power and responsibility we have. So it would be great to have like a workflow. Does that make sense? That might be overlapping with also training, and the other committees.
And so that's why this framework is so important, just for the reason you said. First, we have to have the whole operational picture of what everyone would like to do with their committee, right? And then this is going to have to be kind of like a peer-to-peer discussion, right? So you already know that CIT work is being done here, it's being established here. So my recommendation would be that there is no good reason for another committee to even tackle that issue. And if they had a crossover, right, you would just say, let's send this over to the work group that already exists, if that's practical, right? So it's good business practice to not have your committees in competition over the same issue, right? So it starts with a phone call, or it starts with a conversation about, hey, we might be tackling the same thing. Do we need to flesh out our projects a little better, right? And divide lines of labor, because you'll have that framework to determine that. If these goals and objectives are already set, you'll know right away, looking at the framework, someone else is already working on that, or it's already in their scope, right? If it's not, then it's open to another committee to do it. And if there is crossover, then maybe you end up with a joint report that you both work on, where you contribute to the recommendations or the thing in the end. So it is kind of going to require some conducting, and that's what the staff is here to help with. That's why we're trying to design a common operating picture, and it is incumbent for the chairs of these committees to have conversations when there is a potential conflict of work, and just work it out. Who is the best committee? Because it'll never be 100% cut and dry, and they're not fully defined at that level, and nor do they need to be. There's, it really is just a conversation.
Respond. So I just want to make it practical. Say, the accountability committee has to decide whether the discipline was proper. In order to do that, all of my committee members have to look at those cases. We have to make the assessment. Thankfully, Ms. Benito's on there too. And then we also have to make an assessment. This is a systemic issue. So I guess at some point there has to be quote unquote redundant work, right? But it's eventually going to go to the full committee anyways, for the disciplinary outcome. So I think, probably just communicating better. If they find something that we missed in discipline back and forth, we should be able to communicate in that way, especially, only with regards, I guess, to CIT here. But I don't know if both of you have any other thoughts about, I guess we'll just play by ear until we encounter these issues.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're bringing up the idea of workflow, because I think that is some of the bread and butter of what we'll have to figure out as we get going on all this work is, what are the workflows? What are the ways that we communicate with one another about it? The nice thing is, in this situation, it's pretty easy because you and I are both on both committees. So I don't see a whole lot of concerns with that. But I think I can just explain how my perspective, I think a big part of it is what is the objective of the review. So I feel like if the objective of the review was to determine whether there is potential differences in how discipline is meted out in cases where there is a behavioral health component to the complaint, right? I would see that as relating a bit more to the discipline and accountability committee, or looking at all of the complaints more broadly. Is there a higher percentage of them that are coming from crisis call cases, and then does that inform some of the work that we need to do around discipline? But I think in this particular situation, what we want to look at is, what the complaints are more of a data point that are really useful for us in terms of seeing what's happening and when things are not going well, which is an indication to us that there may be a policy or practice problem. What I'm imagining is, let's say we're reviewing these cases and we're seeing a trend in certain areas, that if we're seeing something that we think, hey, I actually think that maybe this needs a more systemic review from the perspective of accountability and discipline, of, hey, we should review, follow up on these and see what happened with the outcomes of discipline, or that kind of thing. In that case, I think that I might say, I think we need to have a more formal arm of, kind of connection with police accountability and discipline on this. And share that and kind of facilitate it that way. But I think either way, the good thing is we'll be giving work group reports here. And so, at least the two of us will know about it. We can communicate with the other folks on the other committee. And then I think the other thing too is I really like Director Goodrich's point about, if there is something on one committee that, it's like CIT, for crisis intervention, for example, this is the work group that has a lot of people that have specific expertise related to this. So then it could be something like the discipline committee says, hey, we, in a separate work group or in the committee more broadly, hey, we're dealing with this issue or this case, and we kind of would like to have a conversation about that from the crisis point of view. Then I think we could do a kind of a joint meeting, or invite some people. So I think that there's a lot of room for collaboration, but I'm not really concerned about. I don't think that it's going to end up with a situation where we're moving in, making moves or making decisions or making recommendations that are more specifically about discipline and accountability.
To the chair, I'll just make a point here. I don't want to see us devolve into this as a territory idea, okay? This isn't about territory. Whose territory are we encroaching on, right? This is about division of labor. This is, it's all one territory, but you're dividing the labor by who has interest in doing what work, right? And then the topics. So it's collective efficacy, right? You guys have to prioritize all of those interests, but it's all one territory. You're still one commission. So don't devolve into territorial committees, fighting over whose work is who, because there's only 13 of you, so it's all of your work. And you're just splitting up to make the best use of your time, energy, and effort into these committees. But ultimately, what matters is what you produce holistically, because it has to be, every committee has to put it up to the commission for discussion anyhow. So, there will be a lot of crossover.
So I do want to make a suggestion. I'm not saying that we have to do this now, but if we do see, not just with accountability, but another committee, a true kind of endemic, systemic crossover, I might suggest that the work group that's assigned for that topic include inherently the both committees, someone from, sometimes we have a crossover anyways, but that it would be seated kind of across the border of both. Not to say that it's a territory, but just for us to conceptualize, because as I still hear you more say these things, maybe you can clarify this for me, Director Goodrick. You said at some point that in accountability, we are dealing with systemic issues, and you said something about that too. So there is, I'm just trying to understand, what is that role? If we see one case, right? And we don't see it, we can't anticipate a systemic pattern yet, except for maybe potential misconduct. And you guys haven't seen anything systemic yet. What are we supposed to do with that? And if we do see something systemic, it just seems like that there's a lot of overlap. And, I understand, I don't think it's necessary to say this committee deals with it on a topical individual basis and this one deals with it systemically, because I think we will be communicating a lot. But was it your intent to propose that we not take cases unless it has a systemic nature? So do we need to have that as a base?
So I don't remember the specific reference to when I said that or how I said it, but I will say that you don't know what your caseload's going to be yet. So you're living in a world where you have infinite time right now. The accountability committee may become so bogged down just processing, assessing, and ruling on discipline that will meet the criteria for possible intervention, that you may not have time to work on anything else in that committee. So that is the primary focus of that committee, is what is the 115.5 part of the power to impose discipline or overturn discipline in certain cases. So that may take a tremendous bulk of that committee's time, energy, and effort, right? If you were to identify something in an individual case that is systemic, then you can certainly see if that fits into a work group that already is working on that topic, and that's where I would naturally flow it into, right? It doesn't mean you have to break away and start something entirely new. There's two different things. There's the broad audit of a problem, right, which could fall to any work group, or there's the specific, we're getting into a case, we're looking at a case, we're evaluating a case, and then we're looking at the discipline and maybe overturning that in some way. So, I think that accountability committee has the potential to be very busy with its primary mission, and won't have a lot of time, energy, or effort to devote to some of these other things. So it'll be a natural flow for another committee like policy to have to take up the larger issue, while you're examining the case that exposed that issue specifically in accountability. That's just an example. There's a lot of ways this can go. I don't think we need to overthink it right now. The main point is we have to get a roadmap of what everyone wants to do, and we have to do it relatively quickly. And we'll identify any conflicts with that as it arises in time.
Very, very quick comment.
He's been waiting.
Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to wrap it up.
So I just, to help me maybe conceptualize it, and because people visually, I think it'd be better if we can just, it sounds like there's lots of arrows going a lot of places in the committees. if we could just draw that out, maybe map it out a little bit, it would be helpful. And just
Sure.
also to communicate to the public what the process could be, that it could start in one committee and go, and this is the process that goes to all the other committees, to make sure whatever problem that we identify is addressed holistically by all of the committees. Right, and that there would be an agreement that we find an issue, we pass it along, that there is communication, even before it gets to the full commission, I think.
I think that sounds, we'll take that into consideration and we'll work on it. So I think we need to move on, in the interest of time. So what do we need to discuss related to the budget, the next item on the agenda?
And to the chair, I think what I just mentioned, so the work groups are basically, if you get a lot of pro bono time, energy, and effort, right? If you think that in the next 6 months, less than that, we need to know by November 1st, if you're gonna need an outside consultant, you need to plan that, write a specific proposal for why, and then I will help you craft the process for that, right? And if you want to do any large scale symposium that requires a cost, right? Or even a small scale one, right? Those are the main areas where budgetary concerns come from committees, right? But your basic work group stuff can be done here, or at a location that we don't have to pay for, through one of our partnerships. And most people will dedicate their time. If for some reason you hit the wall where you need expertise that is paid, that's what I need to know, and I need to know it soon in your plan, right? I don't see any need for that at this moment. I think we have a finite amount of money for outside expertise, and if we're gonna use it, it will probably go to this community survey, because we will need to amplify our ability to reach people. We will need to use professionals who have access to real Clevelanders who can give data. So we will probably need to hire a firm for that. And I think that will probably take most of our expendable consultant money this year. We didn't get a lot. So keep that in mind as well, that was something that was agreed upon by most committees, that survey would help guide their work.
Yeah, so one question I had is, so when thinking about the budgetary component, so our fiscal year runs,
It's a calendar.
it's a calendar, okay, great. And so when talking about budgetary needs, we're only talking about things that we will need between now and the end of December?
Those are the priorities,
Okay.
but we're gonna go through the budget committee, we're gonna go into the large scale entire next year within probably 45 days here. Usually we have that done by August.
So if we were to, while writing out the kind of plans for the work group, say, okay, here are all of the potential, things that we might, could be, that we might need, or things that could cost money that maybe we should consider doing, and then just kind of laying that out as the different items and then sending them to you guys, and then that will be considered as part of the budgeting process? Is that?
It will be considered, but again, we have to see how many work groups
Of course, yeah.
have actual budgetary requests before we can understand, the scope of what might be possible.
Right.
And then we might have to have in budget committee the conversation about who gets what resources, because we can't go and ask for a $200,000 increase in something that was a $30,000 line item, because it just probably, the chances of that happening are.
I was more
slim.
just trying to understand what kind of information is needed from us in the creation of the work group.
So project name, objectives, deadline, measurable key results, all that stuff, right? And then when you get to the budget part, if one of your projects is to do like a symposium and it's gonna have a budget, I will help you create that. You don't have to do the work, but you just need to get with me soon and say, what would this cost? And I will help you come up with a cost that we can put on here. And then hopefully within, 30 days, we have this working document from every committee, and then we'll have a general estimate of where to go. Then we can jump right into budgetary planning with the large, the Budget and Grants Committee for the entire fiscal year of 24. So.
Great, I think that's pretty clear. Any other questions? Alana, do you have any questions? Okay, so
What kind of reason?
we're now at the public comment section. So do we have any comment from our esteemed community members?
comment, public comment.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosie Palfy. I just want to, for the record, note that I've added the other staff people to my Team Jason shirt. So Shelley's name, Sarah's name, and Ryan's name is on there. And I just want to say really quick, it is just, I was listening to this meeting on the way here, and it's just so obvious what a loss it would be if Jason was not the director, the loss of institutional knowledge. Because there's so many of us who've been following the CPC's work. We've read the reports over the years. We were part of the old town halls. And one of the things that I wanted to say was, is this might sound like common sense, but I just want to point out, like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, that you should start by going back and look at the CPC's original work. And the reason why I say that is the bias-free policing policy, for instance. And one of the things, first of all, I want to point out is I don't necessarily expect people to believe me. I probably sound like a disgruntled advocate, but I've been doing this for 8 years. I was interviewed for the DOJ civil rights investigation because of my homeless advocacy work. And, you know, anybody can make anything look good on paper. So the first couple of years with MRAC, it was really successful. And the CPC was initially having some interpersonal relation problems the first iteration. And so nothing like the current challenges. But the thing is, MRAC looked like it was just head and shoulders above. And also because there were so many people involved initially, like 30 or 40 people, then 20. So the thing is, the Cleveland Division of Police has never managed to connect the dots and see that mental health and crisis intervention are connected to bias-free policing, use of force, all of that. So I'm going to give you an example. We were never told that they were going to be looking at, revamping the mission statement, something as easy as that. So we weren't even asked to give feedback. We were not told about that they were looking at the bias-free policing policy. I participated in the CPC's survey. And the thing is, the CPC made a lot of great recommendations. They included people's comments and recommendations, and the city ignored a lot of them. And one of the things that I had put in my comments to a survey was the fact that Seattle police was under a consent decree. And ironically, the monitoring team that was hired was also the monitoring team in Seattle. and I'm sorry?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they revamped their policy. I can't remember initially when, but they did it again in 2019. So what they include under demographic categories that Cleveland does not include, that I had recommended, was they don't just include disability status. They actually include mental illness. And one of the reasons why I think that's important is because somebody that has a mental illness, a lot of individuals do not consider themselves to be disabled unless they're collecting Social Security. The other thing is they include economic status, familial status, homelessness, political ideology, and veteran status. And I did research, I didn't know, I would like to recommend that for future full commission meetings that you all include the committee meetings on the agenda at the bottom, because I just happened to find out, like, by accident that you had this meeting tonight. So one of the things I wanted to point out, and I brought this up at a CPC meeting years ago, was the fact that, and Sergeant Jackson should be familiar with this. The city has, I believe it was created in 2009, they have an ethnic intimidation policy. And that policy includes, so basically it talks about hate crimes and like harassment and ethnic intimidation. And for demographic status, it includes Vietnam veterans and disabled veterans. So what I could never understand is why would you have a policy that includes demographic groups that you're not including in your bias-free policing policy? And then later, I have this documentation somewhere at home, homelessness was considered in a policy for something. I don't know if it was added to that or not, but there were a lot of crimes happening where they called them bum bashing videos. People were attacking homeless individuals at public square with bats, filming it and putting it on YouTube. And so city council stepped in and said, you know, we're going to go ahead and pass this ordinance. So I never understood why homelessness was also not included. So I think that you all should look at that and just be mindful that MREC hasn't looked at all these things. The other thing, I appreciate everybody's, you guys are spending so much time on this, on everything. I appreciate all the time that everybody comes to these meetings, the commissioners. I'm not sure if I'm going to participate in the work group that Commissioner Benito asked. One of the reasons I almost didn't come back. I was so offended by what happened at the last policy meeting. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I told the commissioners what happened with the crisis policies. I don't expect anyone to just believe me. Trust and verify, okay? But Chair Ridgway, I got excited when I saw her looking at her phone. I'm like, okay, she's checking this. And with all due respect for her, I know she was trying to do something good, but she used a news story to fact check me about training, okay? Now, keep in mind that the information the media, you can't assume the media stories are correct, number one. Number two, the information they get is from the police department. And number three, the people that are providing this information do not attend MRAC meetings. Okay, so that was just really disconcerting. And I would just say that when you guys want to fact check something, start with the consent decree, okay? And, you know, also the charter, but I did hear Director Goodrich mention dispatch, right? So there are places in the consent decree that do mention dispatch, and one example is with crisis intervention. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and I thank you, Commissioner Van Lier, for your latitude letting me speak, is that what happened with these new dispatch codes, I brought it up in the MRAC training meeting today, and Commissioner Benito was there. Thankfully, the department did the right thing. But my concern is process and how they got there. So what happened was earlier this year, an OPS investigator reached out to me, and I have staff from City Council. People reach out to me. I'm not bragging, but you know, they're familiar with my work, and so reached out to me and said, hey, you know, we've noticed over the years that we're getting a lot of complaints where people are offended because they're getting a copy of their police report, or they're getting a copy of body camera footage, and they're referred to as mental violent or mental nonviolent female, male, whatever. And they're understandably upset by that, okay, insulted. And so, you know, they asked me about, and I said, well, you know, those are dispatch codes. And so one of the investigators made a recommendation that the city look at, they made the recommendation to the Civilian Police Review Board earlier this year, and they made a recommendation to the police department that they look at those dispatch codes and try to find something that was less stigmatizing. And the issue that I have is that should have gone to the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, and it didn't. And thankfully, the police department did the right thing, but we have a monitoring team that's getting paid $250 an hour. Dr. Randy DuPont is the premier crisis intervention expert in the country, and he would have known different codes that are being used in other cities. So I just wanted to point that out, and oh, gosh, I can't. You know, training. So they were talking about in-service training today, and they had topics. and they were basing their choice on a survey. Well, after the meeting, I looked at the survey, and I'm not really sure how many officers there are now. Only 66 police officers took the survey to vote on topics. And basically, the training committee was told what the topic would be. They didn't vote on it. They didn't take it to the full MRAC. So I just want the police commission to know that what's happening. And I don't want to speak for Commissioner Benito, but I think that she's seeing some of this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Richard, do you want to?
Mr. Jackson, do you have?
Thank you to the chair and to the commissioners. I'm sorry I was a bit late getting here. I had to leave from work. And so when I came in, you guys were speaking about the shot spotter and the technology portion there. First, I'd like to say I would love to be on that work group if that's a possibility. But
My work,
That would be great.
Sergeant Johnson.
Can you do both?
I look at your phone.
the reason why is because while part of that conversation got into deployment of resources, which by the charter, only the chief has that authority, is to deploy resources. However, the policy is written properly. The policy would then force a deployment of resources. Doing it that way. I've actually prepared some ideas for that at a later time to share with you, but I just thought that I should put that out there for you to understand that you can do it, you just have to do it through the policy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you, Ms. Palfy. And with that, we are coming to the end of our meeting. So I would say we are adjourned. I don't have a gavel.
Both the Bayou Gavel.
It's okay.
Yes.
Oh. Yes.
It's not-